cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for surviving the afternoon. We have Dave Monroe and Neil. I will let them introduce themselves. They are the Controllerless team. They think that controllers are useless.
So, my name's David Monroe. Work on the Aruba Instant side. Controllers, as far as I'm concerned, I think of the past. It's all about controllerless this point forward. So all the stuff that Scott talked about, you can forget that from this point for the discussion.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Neil Kulkarni. I'm a technical marketing engineer here at Aruba Networks. Been with Aruba now close to a year. So today's topic, I'm going to deep dive into Aruba Instant architecture. But before I get into the depth, I want to give you a context of what we are trying to show in terms of Aruba Instant. So one of the things that Ozar mentioned and Kirti mentioned in the past is Aruba Instant architecture fits really well for the distributed enterprise and retail kind of environment, right? Where you have maybe say a couple of thousand stores you want to go and deploy Wi-Fi, and you want to have maybe say 5 to 10 access points per store. And for those kind of environments, Aruba Instant fits well. But let's talk about what are the challenges of doing that kind of a deployment, right? So for example, think just in terms of deployment. If you have, say, for example, 2,000 stores you want to go and deploy to, and for every store, you want to complete the deployment of the entire network, say within a month, what are the logistics involved? One is you have an option to either pre-configure all these access points into some kind of your headquarters facility, an assembly line, where you basically have somebody come and open the access point, put in its basic IP, putting its basic config, and then reship it out to the actual store, and then plug it in, and it will come up. So that's a huge OpEx expense, as well as lost time to double the shipping from one place to another. And think about this spread out regionally, right? That's a huge expense. The second option you have is to send the access points directly to these stores and send certain instructions with them. But the problem with that is you require a certain level of skill set to go in at the individual store to be able to configure that and bring it up. And also that can lead to more headaches on the network admin to kind of any kind of troubleshooting issues that can come out of it. So to remove or to mitigate both these issues and to reduce the cost from a customer perspective, the solution that Aruba has for that is what we call Aruba Activate, which is basically our zero-touch provisioning. And I'm actually going to go and show you the interface and walk you through how we set it up and what it takes to set it up. But before that, let me just walk you through the workflow of how that works, right? So what this slide is showing you is you have Airwave. The assumptions in this slide is there is Airwave as your management entity. And you have on your remote side, which would be your store side, you're going to deploy an instant network. And one thing that you need to note is that remote site needs to have internet connectivity so that it can do all this function that you're talking about. So let's see what happens when you basically plug in an AP into the network. And just to give you guys a context, the WFD site that you're using, or the WFD SSID that you're logging into, is basically coming up off of this AP that I plugged in this morning from default config, going through the exact same process. So I'll walk you through the timeline of how this came up. So in terms of walking you through this, what happens is once you plug in that AP into the network, first it's going to go and find out, based on DHCP, is there any other AP on the network that's already there and is a virtual controller from which I can download my config and my image and come onto the network. If it does not find any other AP onto the network, right, like in the case of this access point, by default its behavior is to go and look for devices.arubanetworks.com, which is basically our Activate server. So once it goes to Activate server, Activate is pre-configured with that information saying, if this AP comes up, this is the management entity of this AP. And the management entity is basically the Airwave server that belongs to that customer. So at that point of time, the AP gets the information that this is my Airwave server, and this is where my configuration is supposed to reside. So the AP will then go and contact Airwave and then download its configuration. This is basic. Yeah.
Where's that server?
That server is located at the customer data center.
So
Typically.
there's two things.
Yep.
This is basically in our cloud infrastructure. So the Activate's a system that has a lot of the data that we have from a manufacturing ERP system, all feeds into that. So what we're doing is we plan all the products that we build in the Activate system. So our ops teams plan our products. That information gets shipped across to our contract manufacturers. Our contract manufacturers then feed us reports back that will shift the product from a planned state to a manufactured state. Then once we have an order's been processed through our ERP system, which happens to be SAP, we then get a report that says, now this product has been either shipped to an end customer or to a distributor. From that, we associate those devices to either the customer or the distributor. We also have a POS feed that comes back in that assigns the devices that were sold through distribution to the end user. So a customer would come in, and Neil will actually demonstrate this, and log into the Activate portal and create a couple of very simple provisioning rules for all the devices they own. This is hosted by us, and we can even talk about the security policy that we have with respect to that. This platform here would generally be located in the customer's NOC or at their corporate headquarters. Does that answer the question? Yep.
So at that point of time, Airwave is given all the information that it had as the configuration for that AP, and the access point got its configuration. So at that point onwards, any other access point that you will plug into that store will automatically get its configuration from that AP that came up. So from, it's only the first AP that you plug in really needs to go out and fetch the configuration. Rest of the APs will automatically join the network and come out, as long as they're in the same L2 domain. Any questions on this? So with this, let me,
Just one question.
Yeah.
Was the Activate a service that they had to pay for extra above?
No, this
So-
is,
so- Yeah, so one of the things, so Activate as a service is completely free.
Mhm.
We look at this as a mechanism to allow our customers to deploy our product more expeditiously, faster, get them up and operational quicker, which means it gives them more opportunity to buy more equipment from us and roll out more sites. So this is completely free, and you can literally just go to activate.arubanetworks.com, and there is a request login button, and that would be how a customer would fill in a little bit of information and would basically create them an account.
Is there a possibility with that portal to have a single corporation create multiple logins for multiple different?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep. So if you once the say if you were to go in and create a single login, you would then be able to create additional usernames and passwords for people within your organization, and you can even have them either have a look at the entire list of devices, or you can actually segment those devices down to smaller groups and smaller folders.
And by the way, guys, you have access to the Activate.
Yep.
So take a little login, start playing around, folders, etc. Activate.arubanetworks.com, and you have the password and username there.
and the last link that shows up on the slide is basically you have options, right? So with this, you can have your IAP configured such that it automatically goes and builds a VPN tunnel back to a controller at your NOC in case you want connectivity directly to your NOC as a VPN connection. So that's an option.
So one of the reasons you might want to do this, for example, might be, say if you've got centralized AAA infrastructure and you want to have your centralized AAA infrastructure back at your corporate data center, you could have all your corporate users get their authentication back through the VPN. We could effectively NAT all traffic associated with the guest SSID and drop that out locally. So it's, from that perspective, it provides a pretty decent amount of flexibility.
How much are you able to actually tunnel over that? Would you like to HTTP for a guest VLAN?
The VPN connection that's connected back to the physical controller is IPsec. The capacity for the IPsec throughput is dependent on the AP model. So it ranges from around 25 to 30 megabits up to around 100 megabits, depending on the specific platform you choose. And then So I think that.
And in this instant, is it only the virtual controller that does the tunnel, or do each of the APs do it?
So from an IPsec perspective, it's the virtual controller is the only platform that creates the tunnel. We do have a couple of other tunneling mechanisms for different use cases that we can construct a tunnel on a per AP basis, but that's more of an SP specific application.
So basically that becomes the virtual controller and the controller tunnel. The Ipsec tunnel becomes a routing point. The traffic gets routed based on policy centrally that's sent out to users.
And one of the key things with this is when you hear us talk about Aruba Instant plus VPN from a scalability perspective, you'll see us not use the term APs when we're talking about scalability on the controller side, because what we'll actually refer to is we'll talk about number of sites, because it's effectively now the controller itself is doing the data plane termination of the traffic you select to tunnel back, and it's one tunnel per site.
So, Neil, you want to show the...
Yeah, I'm going to log into Activate.
as well?
Yep.
Yep. Any more questions on this? Okay. So with this, I'm going to ask you guys to log into the Activate account that you guys have, and I'm also going to log into that account.
And we have customers using this today. One of our customers deployed 300 locations in 7 days using the system.
So this is the dashboard once you log in. This is the main dashboard view that you will get. And what's great about this view is the fact that, first of all, this information comes in, like Dave mentioned, right from the time an order is shipped to the customer. So from an inventory management perspective, the customer has complete visibility into all the inventory that he's ordered and has got shipped to him. Secondly, if you look at it, the customer gets a view of all the AP models that the network has, and it also gives a picture of the firmware that's running on all the models. So in case of any kind of upgrade decisions that need to be made or things like that, the customer has visibility into what the majority of the network is running, and if the customer can find certain stability issues and stuff like that, he can decide based on the version running which makes sense to run. The other thing that you can see is it gives you a context of what APs have been provisioned and have been shipped. So if this is a deployment that is ongoing, the customer can keep track on a daily basis of what actually got provisioned and what exactly is still remaining to be provisioned. Any questions on this so far? So let me deep dive into what exactly needed to be done for the AP that I set up today and how exactly it came up. So in terms of setup, it's basically 3 simple steps. The first step is just creating a folder. The folder, to think about it, is basically a logical entity under which you want to group a certain configuration. So for example, if you want 50 of your sites to have one configuration, for those 50 sites, you will create one folder, right? So once the folder is created, that's when you actually go and define rules for the folder, and that's the next 2 steps. So the first rule you will define would be a provisioning rule. And this is the rule that actually gives the information of what, once the AP contacts activate, what do I send back to the AP, so that the AP knows where to fetch the configuration from and what my Airwave server is. So like I said, the parent folder is the one that I created as a logical entity. So I'm saying for branch 1, this is my config. This is my folder. And then what I say is the AMP IP, which is the Airwave IP, is this. So in this case, I've given a public IP, but basically what it means is the Airwave IP needs to be an IP that's reachable from the remote site where it's going to be deployed. And then if you notice, there is something, a shared secret. Now this shared secret is just used to verify that the AP that's coming in is a legitimate AP from that Airwave perspective. So this shared secret actually will also reside in Airwave to make sure that the AP that contacted me is a legitimate AP. That's all its purpose is. And the next rule so this is it, right? This is the provisioning rule. All I said is, this is the folder in Airwave, which is my parent folder, and this is the organization name, which basically maps to the group in Airwave that I have set up with the configuration, and this is the Airwave server. That's it. After that, the second rule that I have set up is just to notify me. It's an email provisioning rule. What it means is once this access point gets provisioned, send me as a network admin an email saying, yes, this access point was deployed and got provisioned. It's all that this rule does.
And the notification rule, this particular notification rule is basically doing an email on a provisioning event. But you could set up a notification rule on a shipment event or any other event within the system, so it doesn't have to just be a provisioning event.
So just by email or also by text? Or?
Today just by email, but we're looking at extending that out to text as well.
So to walk you guys through the timeline of the AP that I plugged in, right? I plugged in this AP this morning at 11:50 a.m. and the AP that I'm talking about is this IAP 135. So exactly after around 2 to 3 minutes after I plugged in the AP, it contacted Activate, and Activate said, here, the provision I gave it provisioning, and at the end you can say the status was a success, which means that Activate gave it the right configuration and the AP got provisioned. And if I want to go and check whether I got an email corresponding to that, I can check real quick that exactly at 11:53, which corresponding to the same time, that AP got provisioned and I got an email saying, here's the AP that got provisioned. So now let's log into the AP, and before I do that, I want to give you a context of what architecture exists so that you can log into the AP that you can log in and the configuration I've set up for this network right now. So this is the architecture that's actually existing for this AP that's come up. And let me define this a little more from a customer perspective, right? So what you see as the data center, imagine that as the customer's data center. And what the AP is plugged in here, imagine that as the branch network. So once the AP is plugged in, I've actually created a VPN back in to my lab, which is in this case the data center. And the reason that's important so that you guys know is the reason you could log into the controller through that network is because that VPN exists. Without that VPN, the guest network that is here is not really routed into the corporate network where those devices exist, or the lab network where those devices exist. So one of the great things that IAP provides is the ability to do two VPN tunnels. So if you have, say, for example, geographically redundant data centers, you could actually have VPN tunnels. You can establish those two data centers with controllers there, and you can do fast VPN failover between those tunnels. So from a deployment redundancy and resiliency perspective, that's very important.
Yeah, so just, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that. You're saying that each IAP can do 2 VPN tunnels to single control?
Yeah,
Each virtual controller.
So each virtual controller, so the way it works is, if you wanted to do controller redundancy, you would generally set up a controller pair with VRRP between the two controllers at a data center. Then you could have a completely separate data center, which has got nothing to do with the first data center, with the two other nice redundant controllers. Because even though we're a virtual controller, because we're a controllerless group in this particular part of the discussion, we still like controllers to some extent. Basically, so you could set up a separate pair. Then the virtual controller itself, which would be, say, residing here, can set up basically a primary tunnel to the first location, and then have an active secondary tunnel already established to the secondary data center. If they lost connection and we continually send heartbeats to that second data center, if we lose connectivity to the first data center, we'll automatically fail over to the alternate data center.
Can you configure that VPN for the virtual controller before it shuts out so that it's basically time to connect to the airwave interface through that VPN connection?
If you had the only way you could do that is because the VPN connection is part of the virtual controller config that gets pushed from Airwave. So what you would have to do is you could still go through, if you already had a VPN established, you could go through that and it doesn't have to come out locally, as long as it can get to devices that are ArubaNetworks.com.
But I mean, to that point, right? If you're the thing you would have to do to provision the VPN network is do some part of the config on that virtual controller or on that IAP. So at that point, you're doing some part of the config for that IAP and then shipping it, and then it'll get the remaining config from AMP, if that's the way you want to go with it.
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking of a situation where somebody, for whatever reason, they don't want to expose their airwave instance to the internet, but want to use the VPN.
So there's a so we've had a couple of questions around that. So one of the things that we've done on the IAP side is we're using from a security posture perspective, all the Aruba equipment has TPM devices in them. We have a complete PKI infrastructure within Aruba. We are loading secure credentials on every device that goes through our manufacturing line. We're using a device authentication based on CERT to both the Airwave system and the Activate system. So from a security perspective, it's pretty safe. When we've seen people who are concerned about having the Airwave interface, it's HTTPS, what we've seen people do is people have set up an Airwave platform that does the device discovery, and then they'll shift that to a secondary Airwave once it's pushed the actual VPN config. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah.
So it's kind of like a staging AMP.
Is there a cost-effective, friendly way of licensing that staging AMP that isn't
Yes.
really used much?
Yep. Because it's based on device count,
So if we just license it for 5 devices or whatever.
then
what
you'd
would
be
we
just
really
limited
use?
to how many simultaneous devices that hit it. That's correct, isn't it, Sujatha? Yep. So one of the other things so you actually brought up licensing, which is kind of a key topic. One of the things that I look at from a licensing perspective, in order to terminate the VPNs on the controller, you don't need any licenses at all. So basically, we treat that as similar to a controller-to-controller VPN, which is a site-to-site. So you can effectively use, a couple of 7200s, and there is no licenses required to build this network as it sits today on the controller.
Yep. So from a data flow perspective, right, the way this network would look, and again, the lines that you're seeing coming out of the switch, imagine that coming from the actual access point itself, because that's where the traffic would generate, right? So you can actually do networking rules in the access point to do split tunneling, meaning you can, if you want, you can send certain traffic back to your data center in case you have certain central, services that you want to provide, versus the rest of the traffic you could directly drop it off of the branch network onto the uplink that exists there. So, and with the dual VPN, like we mentioned, in case one of the controllers were to go down, you would have the other controller take up the VPN and it would automatically flow. And from our testing, we've seen that the hit is 1 second. You miss one ping between the VPN failovers. So that's how much resiliency and high availability is built into this. And the other piece of this is, what if my uplink itself at the branch has a problem, right? And the other aspect that IAPs come with is ability to do 3G, 4G uplinks or any kind of Wi-Fi uplink. So at that point of time, you can do the same kind of tunnel through your 3G, 4G link.
So you could literally put 3G, 4G style modem in a USB port on one of the RAP 108, 109s, one of the RAP 3s that run the Aruba Instant code, and that could be effectively a backup WAN connection for that particular site.
Could you tie ACLs to that? Obviously there could be 3G, 4G costs.
Yes. So one of the absolutely. So one of the types of discussions that we get is if I'm say I'm offering, say if this was a retail store, for example, and I have my credit card payment services going across this connection, and I also have my guest access across that same connection. If I lose my cost optimized solution, I don't necessarily want to offer guest Wi-Fi across 3G, 4G because that's pretty expensive. So we can actually have that shut down.
So if you have the 3G and 4G up and running, it's taking the fastest connection then, or
Sorry.
if they are both running?
So right now it's it's not a load sharing system. It would basically be a backup. So it would wait for the primary to fail before the 3G, 4G would be activated.
Difficult to know because the 3G, 4G is going to change moment by moment
Right.
based
Right.
on load.
Right.
And you can set priority to which uplink you want to prefer
Right.
as your primary uplink.
Right.
Any questions? Any other questions on this? So with this, let's log into the IAP, actual interface. I think you guys have been given 3 IAP addresses. So if you can maybe share, split it based on 4 there, 4 there, 4 there, we can divide up the IAP interfaces you guys log into.
And,
So,
and one of the things that while Neil's logging into this is when I look at the way we've looked at the infrastructure from an IAP perspective, we haven't made any assumptions about where those devices are deployed. They could be deployed across an internet connection. They could be deployed across a private, MPLS VPN style connection. So one of the things that if you think about how you manage and monitor these types of systems, one of the key things is you need the infrastructure itself to initiate the connection to the management entity. That allows you to traverse things like NAT. You need to make sure it's a very secure protocol that it's connecting to that management entity. So we're all using HTTPS. The second thing that we're doing as well is because of the types of links that we're running across, we have to be very careful about low bandwidth, high latency type WAN links. So we've created a very efficient protocol of pushing information. So it's basically an XML compressed block of data that gets pushed in that HTTPS tunnel that's established to the management entity. So those are some things that we've sort of looked at doing to make sure that the system works well.
So each one of you, whoever is interested, is logged into their IAP interfaces. You all could get to your IAPs. So again, one thing to note is the way you guys are logging into the IAP is actually the inner IP of the IAP of the VPN tunnel. So think about it, if you are sitting in the headquarters, you now can actually access each of the IAPs that are located in the remote sites through the VPN tunnel. And that's how you guys are logging in right now to the IAPs. So from the IAP interface itself, right, the whole point and the way this was designed from ground up was to keep simplicity in mind, but at the same time make it enterprise grade. And that's a challenging thing because it's easy to keep simplicity there when you have less features and the product doesn't do much. But as your product has so many features built into it, to still maintain the simplicity on the interface is a really challenging task. And I think that's something that I should call out here that I appreciate about this product. So one of the things I want to show you is for these kind of regional deployments, it can be across continents, right? And that's where the localization aspect comes into play. And it's as simple as just selecting a language, and as soon as I do that, the whole interface switches to that language.
Who knows German?
Yeah. Okay.
And in fact, the language will auto switch. You can do it manually like this. It will actually auto switch based on the settings of your browser.
And the help is multi-language
Yep.
too?
Yep.
So take a look at German.
Yeah, if I can, hopefully, yeah.
So I looked, right, so you mouse over the help is mouse over. You can have a help, which we publish online in our support team, but then there's this, which is just built into the product, which makes it relatively easy to just bring yourself up to speed. Product does.
And I think we're sort of getting pretty close. I think as we want to leave a little bit of time for roadmap type discussion.
Yeah, I mean, 10 minutes if you guys can wrap
Yep,
it up.
yep.
So
So some of the other things is if you want to drill down to a client level, you can just pick a client or search for that client, and you can look at all the real-time stats right on the interface in terms of the frames, if there are any error rates, the total throughput that the client is getting, as well as the actual speeds that the client has been connected in terms of the fire rate to the access point.
This will be the equivalent to the controller version, basically,
How close are those interfaces going to get? This doesn't look much like the other, the controller interface.
Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of data that we display on the Instant is a filtered down version of the controllers. I think controllers looks at unicast, broadcast, upload, download, and it doesn't do that.
And HTML5 rather than Flash?
HTML5.
If you have, say, a relatively large instant installation which is going across subnet boundaries, but you want to maintain the same configuration throughout, does it mean your configuring a separate VC in each subnet,
So the
or is there some kind of like hack type functionality like the big controllers have to do roaming across subnets?
So there's a couple of things. I think let's take the first question, which is how you would manage a multi-instant cluster environment. You generally do that through Airwave. So if you set up say a 600 AP network that was basically, let's make it 12 50 cluster AP clusters. You'd generally manage that through Airwave. So that would be your single configuration point for that entire network. From a mobility perspective, you would basically set up L3 mobility between the clusters. So you'd have L2 mobility within a given cluster. Then if you roam from one cluster to another, it would establish tunnels across to that other cluster.
That
So
would be something you'd have to separately configure in each VC?
No, so you'd basically be able to push that from Airwave.
Oh, okay, so that would be part of what you do in Airwave, is just say you want to have...
Right, because what you're doing is you're basically building a mobility group that gets pushed to all the virtual controllers, and that basically establishes who you go query to find out where you're transitioning to.
That makes sense.
In that case, what decides which channel, which frequency, and so on, and power levels? Because with the controller, this is all done automatically, right?
So the question there is, how do you select channel, power, those sorts of things? So with Aruba Instant, the Instant OS is based on Aruba OS. In fact, if you look at the way we name the code, this particular version of code is Aruba Instant 6.2.0.0-3.2. So it's effectively picking up all the ARM capabilities that exist in the base Aruba OS 6.2. So all your channel power, your band steering, all those sorts of functions, they work the same as what they would from a physical controller perspective.
And that actually brings a very important point, which is in this kind of a distributed enterprise architecture, one architecture is which Ozer mentioned, the flex type which Cisco has. And what that does is the control plane still resides at the central point. Whereas in case of Instant, this control plane is now distributed at each of these sites. And what that does is gives you the ability, even despite the WAN link issues, to have these channel power adjustments done, or any kind of intrusion detection kind of stuff to be done irrespective of the connectivity back to your headquarters site.
Yeah.
So you have complete site survivability in that perspective.
Question?
Your noise floor icon shows like really, really super high noise, but the numbers are like -84. Is that accurate? Reasonable? Like go pick on a client.
That's for 2.4 gigahertz here.
Yeah, but is -84 really qualify as like the worst noise floor icon you could possibly come up with? I told you they were going to ask a tough question.
Good question.
Go back to the main page. Go back to the main Instant page.
Okay.
And pick on a client. In the lower left-hand corner, the noise floor icon is like, well, once upon a time. Monitoring. Sorry, monitoring for the client.
Okay.
See, the noise floor icon is like really, really bad. It looks like the worst icon you could possibly have from a noise.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when you click at your noise floor, it's like -84, which is, less than ideal, but it's far from the worst you could possibly get, isn't it? Pretty bad. You can see,
really?
not really, maybe.
I mean, you can still have 20 SNR without any.
I think
Is that really like the worst noise floor?
so. I think the purpose of that icon specifically is to call out any issues in the network directly to the network admin. It's not a very indicative bar kind of a thing which says 2 bars, 3 bars, but it's more like something that gets highlighted on the screen to call out any kind of issues that are not normal in the network.
We can. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, don't we all?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, every flipping API would be, yeah, we're gonna, that's just, seems excessive.
And in terms of VPN, this is what I was talking to you guys about, where you can actually do a backup of VPN IP, and you can then set up fast failover to happen between those two. Any other questions?
Yep.
Just a comment. When Ozer spoke before about, controllerless, you started this session, yeah, we're the controllerless guys. I haven't yet seen you talk about Instant without a controller in the picture.
So we
You say that, and then every single slide, everything you talk about, oh, we have this controller for this, we have a controller for this, it doesn't
Okay.
feel
okay.
controllerless.
Okay, so I think we're specifically demonstrating kind of more of a distributed enterprise style architecture that requires VPN connection back to a given location. If you're looking at sort of more standalone autonomous sites, there is absolutely no reason to control that at all.
K-12 with, success rules.
Absolutely. So what you do there is you would generally have like an airwave style platform that would be managing all the schools, and you'd have basically virtual controller networks or Aruba Instant networks in every school.
Yeah, if you
And that's a
don't
very
want the-
typical.
Basically, if you don't want the VPN termination.
The controller is only ever used in this architecture if you require a data plane connection back to a specific corporate location.
What if I don't have a lot of VPNs? Could I put another instant AP over there and tunnel instant to instant?
No, we can't. Not today. So the way that the virtual controller works, it works more like a client connection from a VPN perspective. We have controllers that scale up and down on the VPN termination side. So we'd probably just recommend a smaller physical controller in that case.
Yeah, one other comment I just want to make on that is this particular architecture, besides being distributed enterprise, it is for carriers
Right.
that are looking to deploy cellular offload. Imagine a hotspot location that can be survivable with a controllerless single access point or maybe a couple, but they need to integrate back to the mobile core. And there needs to be a box that essentially terminates the tunnels and backhauls the traffic into the core as the case arises. So you need something at the back. Usually that's a security gateway that we interface with if they already have one. But security gateways are simply IPsec aggregators. There's no more context about Wi-Fi to them.
Right.
So what this allows you to do is with the Activate, essentially create a secure zero-touch deployment model that you can't do with security gateways. There's more things we are doing in terms of automated IP address allocation and management for the hotspot site. There's a loosely coupled control between the controller and Instant for that kind of a cellular offload architecture, which is why the controller makes its way back into the architecture from that perspective.
Is there a way for, you had mentioned earlier, the 1% you had mentioned was if you have a wrap back, you have some traveling road warrior, is there a way to take an instant AP
Yep.
and do that
Yeah.
without
Absolutely.
having a controller or
Activate
infrastructure?
can actually tell that IAP what to be. So if that IAP needs to be a standalone instant AP or form a tunnel
So-
back to the
in-
controller, become a wrap.
But it can it be a wrap to other instance?
Can it be
So
wrapped?
if I had, 15 in my school and I wanted to give a teacher an AP to take home, can it be part of that, like you do with a wrap and a controller?
No.
No, we don't currently terminate IPsec tunnels from other APs onto the AP. It's usually an appliance. The controller comes immediately within the situation.
Okay, so guys, we have to start wrapping up.
Yep.
Stephen has up at 5:20. We want to get the last Q&A done. I hope this was useful. You got access to both Instant and Activate. Any last minute comments from anybody? We also want to talk to you about all the great features that we added into Instant, but we can perhaps cover that offline. Any last minute comments on the controllerless?
Having access to your screens was fantastic.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I would say one thing is that, to me, it seems like this would be the ideal kind of architecture for somebody to run an MSP business. To have like
Absolutely.
Aruba
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you know?
airwave managing a bunch of different sites.
In fact, I think there's resellers that are looking at transitioning from more of a product-based sale to an annuity-style business, and they're actually looking at Instant as a platform to do that with.
Activate and
Yeah, Activate, Airwave, and Instant.